struggling with resolution in your size exclusion chromatography, so your peaks are like overlapping when you don't want them to, there are a few things that you could try. Some of them are going to involve getting a new column or using a different column that you already have, whereas others are just things that you can change, like just on the same column, like how much you're injecting or how fast you're flowing things. It all depends on whether your problem is selectivity, so how far apart the peak centers are, or efficiency, how broad the peaks are, because it's the combination of the two that determines whether the peaks overlap, that is, whether they have poor resolution. If your problem is selectivity, then you're going to have to basically get a new column. And so the selectivity is largely going to come down to the size of the pores in the size exclusion beads. So remember, the big proteins go around the small pores that they can't get into, whereas the small proteins go into the pores, and what determines whether the thing is like small or big depends on the size of the pore. And different beads will have different pore sizes, and that will determine the fractionating range, which is the actual range of molecular weights that these beads are able to separate. And so you want to have a column that is the ideal fractionating range for you. You also can go longer to get better resolution. Think of two runners starting at the start of a race, and one of them is fast and one of them is slow. If the race is really short, they're not going to be that far apart, but if the race is long, then they will be far apart. To improve the efficiency, so the broadening, there's a lot of things that you can do that you don't even need a new column, but you can get a new column to improve efficiency if you get a column that has smaller beads or particles. And this is going to make it so that this kind of can reach equilibrium faster as these molecules are moving through. They're going in and out of the beads, in and out of the beads, in and out of the beads, and they're equilibrating, and the smaller the beads, the faster they can do this. And thus, the better the efficiency, so the crisper your peaks. What you do want is a nicely packed column, and you want to make sure that your sample is running through it nicely and that it is uniform. You want to avoid there being any sort of extra dilution that you don't need to have, and so when you're doing the injection, you want to load a small sample volume to get good efficiency, but you also want to load in a kind of loop size that is appropriate. So when you inject into the sample loop, your sample is going to actually dilute in that loop if your sample volume is smaller than the loop volume. And so if you want to make sure that you don't get any dilution in that loop, then you're going to want to have that loop completely filled, and so you want to choose a loop size that way. As things are going through the column, they are not going to be getting stuck to the column, they're just going to be going straight through, as opposed to other forms of chromatography, where they do stick and then you take them off. And so it's important that your volume is small, and so they recommend like 0.3% is the like highest resolution, basically, 0.3% of the column volume, but you don't want to go greater than 2, because it's not going to get concentrated, it's not going to get stuck on the column, and so the volume that goes in is basically just going to move through, and it can only get broader, it can't get narrower. And so you want to make sure that you're injecting a small volume. You can also, to increase the efficiency, lower the speed at which you're running things, so lower your flow rate, and this is going to help you get that better efficiency, the sharper, crisper peaks. But you don't want to lower it too much, because if you lower it too much, then you're going to allow things to start to diffuse that way and have that motion that is not just going straight through down that you want. And so you want to lower it to the point where you get good resolution, but then don't lower it further. Speaking of lowering the speed, if you've got the small beads, that's going to increase the pressure, so you got to lower the speed. And if you're running in a cold environment, then you're going to need to lower the speed too. One thing to keep in mind too is that you want to make sure that your sample isn't viscous. And so if your sample is viscous, then that's going to cause it to interact differently with the beads, and that's going to make it so that your peaks aren't nice and crisp. What can also make it not nice and crisp peaks is if your sample is actually interacting with the beads, and so we don't want the samples to be like interacting with the surface of the beads with size exclusion chromatography. So we want the beads to be like super boring and the samples are just going in and around the beads. And so, but sometimes though, if your protein maybe has like hydrophobic things exposed or whatever, it might actually be interacting with the beads, and this can cause things like your sample to elute later than you think it should, and that sort of thing. You can also, if you overload your column, then you get weird peaks where you kind of get like with weird tails and all this weird stuff. And so there are different kind of weirdness things in your curves. But for the basics of resolution, the resolution that is basically efficiency wise is going to be easier to fix with just doing things like injecting a smaller volume with an appropriate loop, in lowering the speed that you're running things, that sort of thing. Whereas if your problem is selectivity, now you want to get a different column, you want to get something with a more ideal fractionating range, you want to get something that's longer. All those things will help you get the better selectivity. And then with the efficiency, the combination of the two is going to make it so that you can resolve things or not resolve things. Hopefully resolve them.